The sun was just beginning to rise over Wilmington, North Carolina. The air was still, the streets were quiet, and a modest brick house sat on the corner. Its paint chipped, the porch creaking. But inside, a woman stood at the stove flipping pancakes with a tired smile. She had no idea that her son, the boy who used to dribble a tattered basketball through puddles in the driveway, was about to change her life forever. What happened next would leave even the most hardened hearts in tears. This isn't just a story about fame, money, or glory. It's a story about a promise made by a son, and the day he finally kept it. A promise that would lead to a moment so powerful, so moving, that it would remind millions around the world of what truly matters. Because sometimes, the biggest victories don't happen on the court, they happen at home. She woke up every morning before the alarm clock even had a chance to ring. The house was always quiet at that hour. Too quiet. The kind of silence that reminded her she was doing this alone. She'd pad across the cold kitchen floor in her worn slippers, flick on the light, and reach for the same chipped coffee mug she'd used for years. It wasn't fancy. Nothing in the house was. But it was home. Dolores Jordan had built her life around three things: faith, family, and the unshakable belief that if you work hard and stay grounded, good things will eventually come. There were no shortcuts in the Jordan household, no free passes. Every dollar was earned, every meal stretched, and every prayer whispered under her breath when the kids were asleep. Michael was the quiet one, observant, focused. While other kids played with toys or ran wild in the streets, he was always doing something with purpose. Dribbling a ball against the side of the house for hours, the rubber thudding like a heartbeat against brick. Practicing free throws at dusk, long after the others had gone inside. His fingers were always smudged with dirt or chalk or sweat, never idle. They didn't have much. There were nights when the power flickered, and mornings when the fridge echoed back emptiness. But there was never a day when Dolores let her children feel like they were missing something. She patched clothes instead of buying new ones. She made dinners out of scraps and called them feasts. When Michael's shoes tore at the seams from overuse, she stitched them by hand and told him they were custom. But Michael saw everything. He saw the hours she worked, the way she rubbed her temples when she thought no one was looking. He heard the soft sobs behind the bathroom door at night, muffled by running water. He knew that every sacrifice she made was so he and his siblings could have a chance at something more, a chance at a life where their dreams didn't have to be rationed out like food. And in that tiny house, surrounded by peeling paint and secondhand furniture, a seed was planted in him. Not just the dream of playing basketball, but the quiet, burning desire to give something back to the woman who gave him everything. It wasn't about the fame. It wasn't about the glory. Michael didn't talk much back then, but if you watched him closely, you'd see it in his eyes. That deep, unspoken vow. One day, I'll change all this. Still, the journey ahead wasn't paved in gold. There were setbacks, rejections. Nights when he wondered if the dream was too big for a kid from Wilmington. But Dolores never let him quit. When he didn't make the varsity team, she didn't comfort him with empty words. She told him to work harder. When others doubted him, she reminded him who he was. "You were born to fly, Michael," she'd say, brushing the hair back from his forehead. "Don't let anyone keep you on the ground." He carried those words like armor. Through the early morning practices, through the long bus rides to away games, through injuries, defeats, and moments of crushing doubt. Every time he thought about quitting, he thought about her, standing at that stove, folding laundry late into the night, smiling through exhaustion. Years later, when he was asked where his strength came from, he never hesitated. "My mother," he'd say, because before the world knew his name, before the shoes, the championships, the headlines, there was just a boy, a ball, and a mother who believed. And it was in that humble beginning, in that modest house with creaky floors and big dreams, that the story truly began. Because long before he built empires, Michael Jordan was just a son with a promise to keep. The world saw her smile, always warm, always composed. But behind that calm grace was a woman who had learned to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders without ever letting it show. Dolores Jordan didn't need applause. She didn't ask for credit, and she certainly didn't wait around for anyone to thank her. She just kept going, day after day, year after year. The sacrifices she made weren't written about in magazines. There were no press conferences for the night she skipped dinner so her children could eat, or the time she walked instead of catching the bus just to save a few cents. No cameras captured her fingers cracking as she scrubbed the same kitchen floor for the third time that week. But those moments, those small, uncelebrated acts of love, were the real foundation of Michael Jordan's greatness. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. Some days she barely slept, running on fumes and prayer. She'd iron clothes with a steady hand, even when her back ached so badly she could hardly stand. She clipped coupons, counted every coin, and made miracles out of thin air. Birthdays didn't come with expensive gifts, but her children never felt poor. They had stories. They had love. They had a mother who turned struggle into strength. And Michael noticed it all. He saw how she'd sit at the kitchen table with a pile of bills, carefully shifting dollars from one envelope to another. He watched her make tough choices: groceries or gas, shoes or school books. He saw how she always chose them. Always. Sometimes, late at night, he'd hear her voice behind the door, softly reading her Bible by lamplight. That quiet time was her armor, her way of filling back up when the world had taken everything from her. She didn't complain. She didn't blame anyone. She just kept giving. Because that's what mothers do. And hers was extraordinary. Michael remembered a day more clearly than most, a cold morning when his youngest sibling came down with a fever. Dolores had already worked a double shift and hadn't slept. But she wrapped the child in blankets, held them close, and sat by their side all night long. She didn't blink. She didn't rest. She just stayed. The next morning, she put on her shoes, kissed her children goodbye, and went back to work like nothing had happened. That was love. Unshakable. Unbreakable. There were times when Michael would see other kids with shiny new things, brand-name shoes, gadgets, fancy lunches, and he'd feel a twinge of envy. But then he'd look at his mother, her tired eyes, her steady hands, and that longing would vanish. Because he knew what he had was something money couldn't buy. The neighborhood wasn't easy. Temptations were everywhere. But Dolores kept her home wrapped in discipline and dignity. Her rules were firm, her expectations clear. She taught her children that respect mattered, that their name mattered, that the way they carried themselves would speak louder than any words ever could. And Michael took that lesson to heart. Every time he stepped onto the court, it wasn't just to win. It was to honor the woman who had never let him fall, the woman who stayed strong so he could chase dreams. And deep down, even as a young teenager, he understood that greatness wasn't something you were born with. It was something passed down, through grit, through love, through sacrifice. He didn't talk about it much back then. He wasn't one for dramatic speeches or big declarations. But in quiet moments, when the house was still, Michael would lie in bed and whisper a promise to himself. One day, I'll give her everything. One day, she won't have to lift another finger. Because he knew. Behind every jump shot, every win, every headline, they'd never know the full story. But he did. It started with her, the woman who gave everything and never asked for anything back. And in his heart, that silent sacrifice would echo louder than any crowd. The alarm never rang. It didn't have to. Michael was always up before it did, rubbing the sleep from his eyes as the sky still sat in darkness. The house was cold, quiet, still. He'd move through it carefully, careful not to wake anyone, careful not to make a sound. The floors creaked under his growing frame, but he knew where to step. Years of practice had taught him how to move like a shadow. Out the front door, into the morning air that bit at his skin, he'd start his jog toward the nearby court. Just a cracked slab of concrete behind a school, surrounded by chain-link fencing and half-broken lights that flickered more than they worked. It wasn't much, but to him, it was everything. Some days, there was frost on the rim. Other days, rain pooled in the corners, and he'd have to mop it off with an old towel stuffed into his bag. But none of that mattered. This was where he came to sharpen the edge, to put in the hours when no one else was watching. Shot after shot, dribble after dribble. He worked in silence, the echo of the bouncing ball his only company. It was easy to think that someone like Michael Jordan was born for greatness, that it was simply in his blood. But those mornings told a different story. They told the story of a boy who showed up every single day while the world slept, who ran wind sprints under the streetlights and made baskets instead of hours, who practiced not until he was tired, but until he couldn't move. And when he got home sweat-soaked, sore, shoes caked in dirt, his mother was always there. Not with loud praise or dramatic applause, but with breakfast on the table and that quiet, knowing smile. She saw what he was doing, even if she never said much. She knew the fire he was feeding, but not every day ended like that. Some nights, when the doors were closed and the lights were off, the tears came. Not from weakness, not from regret, but from the weight of it all, the pressure, the sacrifice, the sheer hunger to make something of himself, something big enough to lift his whole family with him. He would lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Was he doing enough? Would it ever be enough? The fear crept in, fear that all the work, all the hours, all the dreams might not be enough to change anything. That maybe the world wasn't fair. That maybe effort didn't always equal outcome. And in those moments, the tears would slip down his cheeks silently without protest. He didn't cry for help. He didn't cry for sympathy. He cried because he cared that much. Down the hallway, Dolores would sometimes hear him. She'd pause, hand resting lightly on the doorknob. But she never went in. She knew her son, knew that some things he had to face alone. That strength wasn't built by solving his battles for him, but by letting him grow through them. What she did instead was more powerful. She got up early the next day and washed his practice clothes. She packed his lunch with care. She left small notes in his bag, just a few words, nothing dramatic. "Proud of you. Keep going. I see you." And he felt it. Every time he laced up his shoes, he felt that quiet push behind him. The early mornings didn't stop. Neither did the late-night doubts. But something had shifted. He wasn't just training to win games anymore. He was building resilience, a kind of strength that doesn't show up on stat sheets or in highlight reels. It was forged in darkness, in silence, in the quiet hum of effort when no one's around to clap. And it was those mornings and those nights that shaped him most. Not the arenas, not the trophies, but the unseen hours, the whispered fears, and the boy who refused to give up, no matter how tired he was. The kitchen table wasn't fancy. It was scratched from years of homework, hand-me-down meals, and elbows leaned into its surface during long conversations. The chairs wobbled slightly, the wood chipped at the corners, but it was the heart of the Jordan household. That table had seen it all: celebrations, discipline, laughter, and the heavy silence that comes with hard choices. But on one particular evening, it became something more. It became the place where a promise was made. Michael sat across from his mother, fresh from another long day at school and an even longer session on the court. His shirt clung to him, still damp from sweat, his fingers stained from gripping the basketball like it was the last thing he owned. Dolores was tidying up, wiping down the counter, humming softly under her breath. There was a quiet peace in that moment, the kind that comes only in between the chaos of life. "Ma," he said, barely louder than a whisper. She turned, towel in hand, looking at him the way only a mother can present, patient, and already knowing something important was coming. "When I make it," he said, eyes fixed on the table, "I'm gonna buy you a house, a real one, with a big porch, clean floors, no cracks in the walls, one where you don't have to worry about nothing." She paused, not because she didn't believe him, but because she did. Michael didn't speak like that often. He was focused, driven, but rarely sentimental. But that night, there was a weight in his voice that anchored his words in something more than just hope. It was a vow. She sat down across from him, folding her hands in front of her. There was no dramatic gasp, no tears, just a small smile, the kind that held years of understanding behind it. "Michael," she said softly, "you don't owe me anything." But he shook his head. "I do. You gave me everything." And he meant it. Every early morning, every stitched-up pair of shoes, every skipped meal, every night she sat awake waiting for him to come home safe, he carried it all. He didn't always say it, but he felt it, deep down in his bones. And sitting at that kitchen table, he finally let it rise to the surface. "I don't want you to work anymore. I don't want you to clean other people's houses or worry about bills or stretch leftovers into another dinner. I want you to have a place where you can just rest." She looked at him, and for a moment she saw past the boy in front of her. She saw the man he was becoming. Not just an athlete, not just a competitor, but a son who remembered, who honored, who understood that success without gratitude meant nothing. It wasn't the first time he'd said he'd make it, but it was the first time he said it like that. Not with bravado, not with cocky assurance, but with quiet certainty, a fire in his chest, steady and real. He wasn't dreaming out loud, he was declaring something that already lived inside him. She reached across the table and took his hand. It was rough from hours of drills and worn from repetition. But in that touch was everything unspoken between them. "I believe you," she said simply. That was all he needed. After that night, something changed. Michael trained harder, focused sharper. It wasn't just about making the team anymore, or scoring points, or proving doubters wrong. It was about the table, the promise, the woman who had spent her life giving and never asking for anything in return. He carried that promise into every practice, every game, every challenge. And though the world would one day cheer his name, he never forgot the quiet kitchen where his journey was first spoken into existence. Not in an arena, not on a stage, but right there under the soft flicker of a kitchen light, with tired hands folded across wood scarred by time. A promise made, a future written, a mother and her son. The lights were blinding, the cameras everywhere, and the air inside the room felt heavy with nerves and expectation. Every breath seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 dreams, and every pause in the conversation held the potential to change a life. The NBA draft wasn't just an event, it was a crossing. A moment where past and future met in one room, side by side. And for Michael Jordan, that moment was now. He sat there dressed in a crisp suit that didn't quite feel like his own. His hands were steady, but inside his chest, a storm was building. It wasn't fear, he knew fear. This was different. This was the edge of something. The line between everything he'd worked for and everything he was about to step into. Around him, prospects fidgeted, agents whispered, cameras clicked. It was loud and chaotic, but in Michael's mind, everything slowed. He was back at the cracked concrete court behind his school. Back in the driveway with the rim bent slightly to the left. Back at the kitchen table, looking into his mother's tired eyes as he made a promise he hadn't forgotten. Then, it happened. With just a few words, his world shifted. With the third pick in the 1984 NBA draft, the Chicago Bulls select Michael Jordan. A sharp inhale. Applause erupting around him. Flashes firing like fireworks. He stood slowly, buttoned his jacket, and shook the commissioner's hand. His name had been called. His journey had officially begun. But he wasn't thinking about fame, or contracts, or the bright lights of Chicago. He was thinking about his mother, about how far they'd come, about the days when new shoes were a luxury, and the word future felt more like a question than a promise. Back in Wilmington, Dolores watched it all unfold on a grainy TV screen. She sat perfectly still, hands clasped together in her lap, eyes wide but calm. The room around her was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows years of noise, of struggle, of scraping by, of pushing through. And when his name was announced, she didn't scream. She didn't leap from her chair. She simply closed her eyes for a second and breathed. It had happened. Her boy had made it. And yet, even in that moment, she wasn't thinking about riches or recognition. She was thinking about how, at just 6 years old, he would run laps around the house, ball in hand, declaring he'd be the best one day. She remembered the tantrums after losses, the hours of practice, the hunger that lived in his eyes even when there was barely enough food on the table. She remembered it all. Every scraped knee, every rejection, every moment of doubt. And now, here he was, on the stage. The world was about to meet Michael Jordan, but she already knew who he was. He flew to Chicago shortly after. The city buzzed with curiosity. Could this young guard really be the spark the Bulls needed? Would he survive the pressure? Would he live up to the hype? But Michael wasn't there to prove anything to reporters or critics. He was there with a fire in his chest and a memory in his back pocket. He didn't care about headlines. He cared about legacy. And he was only just getting started. The practice facility smelled of sweat and polish. The floors gleamed, the lights humming overhead. From the first day, he trained like he was still that kid in North Carolina, fighting for a chance. No shortcuts, no days off. Coaches noticed. Teammates respected it, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. Every layup was deliberate, every sprint purposeful. He wasn't just playing basketball. He was honoring every sacrifice that led him to that court. Every morning his mother got up early to pack his lunch. Every night she stayed up late making sure homework got done. Every time she smiled even when her heart was breaking. This wasn't about a contract or a spotlight. This was about making good on a promise. One game at a time. One play at a time. A new world had opened, yes, but Michael hadn't changed. He was still the same kid who whispered dreams to himself in the dark. Only now, the world was listening. And he was ready. They didn't look like much. Just ordinary envelopes, corners a little bent, creased from the journey, the handwriting slightly faded from the press of fingers and time. No special seal, no glossy stamp, no perfume dabbed in the corner like in the movies. But to Michael, they were everything. They came at random, sometimes every week, sometimes only once a month, but always when he needed them most. Whether after a tough game, a brutal loss, or a stretch where the pressure made it hard to breathe, they seemed to arrive like clockwork. tucked in his locker, slipped under his door at the team hotel, handed over by the team manager with a quiet, "This came for you." Letters from home. Dolores didn't write them to give advice. She knew her son didn't need to be told how to dribble, how to lead a team, or how to silence a crowd. That wasn't her role. What she offered in those folded pieces of paper was something else, something stronger. She offered presence, a tether, a reminder that no matter how high he climbed or how loud the world got, there was still a home, quiet and constant, waiting for him. They were never long. Just a page or two, sometimes less. A simple note, written in her neat, deliberate handwriting, the same handwriting that had filled school permission slips and birthday cards for years. Keep your head up. Proud of you always. Don't forget who you are. And sometimes there were stories. Small updates from back home. A neighbor got a new puppy. The church choir finally hit that high note they'd been practicing for weeks. Someone at the grocery store recognized her and asked if she was really Michael Jordan's mother. She always answered with a smile. Not flashy, just proud. She never used the word fame, not once. It wasn't that she didn't recognize his success, she just never measured her son by what he did on the court. To her, the true victories were the ones no one saw. The way he looked out for his teammates. The way he held the door for staff in the tunnel after games. The way he still called her after a big win, even if it was past midnight. Michael kept every single one, stashed in a shoebox beneath his bed, rubber banded together, worn from being read over and over. Some nights, when the weight of expectation sat heavy on his chest, he'd pull one out at random. He didn't need to read them all the way through, he already knew most of them by heart. But still, seeing her handwriting reminded him of who he was, of where he came from. There were moments during the season when the crowd chanted his name and reporters pushed microphones in his face, eager to hear his thoughts. But when he returned to his quiet apartment, away from the noise, he would sometimes sit at the table, unfold a letter, and let his shoulders relax. Because that's what her words did. They quieted the chaos. Dolores didn't write to impress. She wrote to anchor. And Michael knew, even without saying it, that those letters were a lifeline. Once, during a road trip, after a particularly brutal loss, Michael sat alone in the team bus, headphones on but no music playing. His mind raced with missed shots and defensive breakdowns. Then the team assistant walked by and handed him an envelope. The handwriting instantly brought a smile to his face. Inside, "Bad games happen, but you're not a bad man. Don't let one night make you forget how far you've come." That was it. No sermon, no drama, just truth, softly spoken. And that was Dolores. She never asked for credit, never tried to coach him from the sidelines. But her letters, those quiet echoes from home, were as much a part of his training as his jump shot. They reminded him that strength didn't have to be loud, that love didn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it arrived in a plain white envelope, with a mother's hand and a heart full of pride. The calendar on his wall was always full. Game days, travel days, media appearances, practice sessions. There was barely a square left untouched by ink, each one a reminder that his life no longer belonged just to him. It was scheduled, structured, and stretched thin. And somewhere in the margins, in the quiet spaces between buzzer beaters and endorsement deals, lived the things that didn't make it onto the calendar: birthdays, family dinners, quiet milestones that came and went without a pause. Michael never forgot them. He didn't need a reminder to know when his mother's birthday rolled around or when his niece took her first steps. He remembered the date of his parents' wedding anniversary. He remembered the day his little brother graduated. He remembered them all. What hurt was knowing that more often than not, he couldn't be there. The first birthday he missed, he was just a rookie. The team had an away game in Detroit, and the schedule didn't budge for candles or cake. He called his mother that morning, tried to hide the guilt in his voice. She picked up on it immediately. "You're doing what you're meant to do," she told him, calm as ever. "That's the best gift you could give me." But still, when he hung up, the silence in the hotel room felt heavier than usual. As the years passed, the missed moments stacked up like unreturned letters. A family barbecue he couldn't attend because of a playoff run. A cousin's wedding that fell on the same day as a press event. Holidays where his seat at the table stayed empty, save for the plate they set anyway, out of habit and hope. Dolores never complained. Not once. She understood what the world demanded of her son. But Michael knew. He could hear it in her voice sometimes, the pause before she said, "We missed you." The soft inhale before, "It wasn't the same without you." He tried to make up for it. Lavish gifts, surprise visits, handwritten notes. Once, during a brief break in the season, he flew home just to spend 24 hours with his family. No cameras, no headlines, just him, sitting on the porch with his mother, sharing a quiet evening and stories from the road. But even those rare visits felt like trying to fill an ocean with a thimble. The world saw the trophies, the slam dunks, the glory. But they didn't see the price tag. They didn't see the phone calls that ended too soon because he had to catch a team meeting. They didn't hear the birthdays sung through a speakerphone. They didn't know how many times he looked at a photo on the hotel nightstand and whispered, "I wish I was there." And it wasn't just about being physically absent. It was about time, how it moved without mercy. How he'd blink and realize his siblings had grown up while he was on the road. How his mother's hair had more silver in it now. How the home he left behind had changed in ways he hadn't witnessed. Fame had opened every door, but it also closed a few. Ones that mattered. Ones that couldn't be reopened with money or apologies. Still, he kept showing up in the ways he could. A recorded message for a birthday party. A bouquet of flowers delivered with a note that read, "I'm proud of you." A late-night call from a hotel room just to say, "Tell everyone I love them." It was never enough. But it was never nothing either. Because while Michael couldn't always be present, his heart never left. It stayed anchored to the people who shaped him, to the milestones he missed but never forgot, to the birthdays that passed without him there to blow out the candles, but never without his wish floating silently with the smoke, that they knew he cared, that they felt his love even from miles away. He chased greatness with everything he had. But every time the crowd roared, a quiet part of him still longed for the sound of family laughter, for the clink of forks at dinner, for a moment that didn't require a camera to matter. And in that, he was human. A son, a brother, a man pulled in two directions by the game he loved and the people he loved more. It started with a handshake. Nothing flashy, nothing ceremonial, just a firm grip and a look in the eye. At the time, nobody could have predicted that it would shift not just Michael's career, but the entire landscape of sports, fashion, and culture. Back then, it wasn't about legacy. It was about trust. A leap of faith in a brand that wasn't yet cool, and a rookie who hadn't played a single game in the league. Nike wasn't the powerhouse it is today. In the early 80s, it was struggling to find its footing in the basketball world, trailing far behind giants like Adidas and Converse. They weren't looking for a savior, they were looking for a spark. Michael, meanwhile, had his sights set elsewhere. Growing up, he admired the stripes of Adidas. He loved the style, the way they felt, the way they looked. But business isn't always about preference, it's about vision. And Nike had a vision no one else dared to imagine. They didn't want Michael to just wear their shoes, they wanted him to have his own. A signature line. His name, his brand, his story. At just 21 years old, he was being offered a platform most veterans never saw. But it wasn't the money that made him pause. It was the weight of what it meant. His name wouldn't just be stitched into the tongue of a sneaker, it would be stitched into history. The deal was bold, unproven, risky, but it was also rooted in belief. Nike believed in him before the world fully did. And Michael? He took the chance. He listened to his gut, and he said yes. What followed was a whirlwind. The first commercial wasn't extravagant. It wasn't loaded with special effects or celebrity cameos. It was just him. A silhouette, a jump, a message. It's gotta be the shoes. And somehow, that was enough. The Air Jordan 1 hit the market and did what no one expected. It exploded. People lined up for them, talked about them, fought over them. They weren't just sneakers, they were a statement, a symbol of excellence, of rebellion, of style. And Michael wore them with quiet confidence, like armor on the court. But it wasn't just about the money. Sure, the numbers were staggering. The deal brought in millions within the first year alone, turning a simple shoe into a cultural phenomenon. But for Michael, it was about more than dollars. It was about impact, identity, legacy. He saw how the shoes gave kids something to believe in, how they made people feel connected, like they were part of something bigger than themselves. In neighborhoods where dreams were often out of reach, a pair of Jordans became a badge of hope. They said, "You matter. You belong. You can fly." Back home, Dolores watched it all with quiet pride. She didn't understand the world of endorsements, or sneaker culture, or branding. But she understood her son. She knew that whatever he touched, he poured his soul into. Whether it was a game-winning shot or the curve of a logo, he approached everything with purpose. Michael didn't just lend his name, he was involved. He cared about the designs, the colors, the meaning. He wasn't building a product, he was building a legacy. One that would outlast seasons and scoreboards. One that would give back in ways most couldn't even see. And in the middle of all the hype, the headlines, and the hysteria, he remained grounded. He still called his mother after big launches, still asked if she was doing okay, still remembered the kitchen where he once laced up worn-out sneakers before school and promised himself he'd never forget where he came from. Years later, as the brand soared to untouchable heights, interviews and documentaries would try to capture the genius behind the deal. They'd talk about timing, marketing, influence, but the truth was simpler than that. It was about a young man who carried more than just talent. He carried grace, pressure, purpose. And one day, when he walked into that boardroom and took a chance on something uncertain, he wasn't thinking about building an empire. He was thinking about giving kids who looked like him something to dream about, something to reach for, something that reminded them, flight isn't just about wings, it's about belief. And that's how a shoe became a movement, how a deal became a legacy, and how Michael Jordan, with one decision, changed everything not just for himself, but for millions who followed his steps. It stood at the end of a long, winding driveway, gated, quiet, grand without being loud. The kind of place that didn't scream wealth, but whispered intention. Brick by brick, room by room, it was built not just as a house, but as a promise fulfilled. For years, Michael had dreamed about this moment. Not the moment of buying it, but the moment of walking his mother through the front door and watching her face. He remembered the small house they grew up in, the creaky floorboards, the shared bedrooms, the kitchen that always felt a little too warm in the summer and too cold in the winter. Dolores made it a home, but it was never easy. There were nights when the power flickered from unpaid bills, mornings where breakfast was whatever they had left in the fridge. Still, there was love. Always love. That kind that made even the roughest edges feel soft. So when Michael reached a place where money was no longer a worry, when the zeros on the checks started blurring into each other, he knew what he had to do. It wasn't about the square footage or the marble countertops. It wasn't about the indoor theater or the sweeping staircase. It was about giving his mother a space that reflected what she had given him: security, peace, dignity. He didn't tell her right away. He kept it quiet, planned it in silence, just like she had done with so many sacrifices over the years. Every decision, every fabric, every tile, every frame on the wall was made with her in mind. Her favorite colors, her love for open windows and soft lighting, the kitchen, spacious and sunlit, because he remembered how she'd always said she dreamed of one day cooking with space to breathe. When the day came, he picked her up himself. No assistants, no chauffeurs, just Michael and his mother, like it had always been. She asked where they were going, and he shrugged, offered one of those half smiles she'd known since he was a boy. As they pulled through the gates, she looked out the window and went quiet. "This is beautiful," she whispered. He didn't say anything right away. He wanted her to see it, not just hear it. They parked, and he led her to the front steps. No speech, no build-up, just a key in his hand and a quiet look in his eyes. She paused before turning the handle, like she already knew something was different. And when the door opened, she stepped into a new world. The floors gleamed, the walls glowed, and there, waiting in the entryway, was a framed photo of the two of them, young Michael, maybe 8 or 9, standing next to his mother at a school event. They were both smiling, tired but happy. She froze when she saw it. "You did this," she said, voice barely a breath. He nodded. "It's yours." She turned slowly, taking it all in. The high ceilings, the art on the walls, the fresh flowers arranged in vases like something out of a magazine. But it wasn't the luxury that made her eyes well up. It was the thought, the detail, the feeling that every inch of the space had been made not for a public showing, but for her comfort. In the back, there was a garden. Roses, peonies, lavender, her favorites. He remembered how she used to cut old milk jugs to pot plants in their backyard. How she used her hands, no gloves, digging into the soil after long shifts. Now, she could garden without pain, without struggle. Just joy. They sat on the patio that evening, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting everything in gold. She held his hand and didn't say much. She didn't need to. Because behind the mansion gates, past the polished floors and tall windows, lived something rare. A son's gratitude, a mother's peace, a quiet victory that couldn't be captured by headlines or trophies. It wasn't about the house. It was about the journey that led to it. About the nights she stayed up worrying, the mornings she pushed through exhaustion, the dreams she put on hold. All for him. And now, without a single word, he had given her something she never asked for, but always deserved. A home that said, "Thank you." A home that said, "I remember." A home that finally gave her the space to exhale. It was old, worn at the edges, creased from years of being folded and unfolded. A soft fade where his thumb had rested too many times to count. Tucked neatly behind a couple of cards and a faded photograph, it wasn't something most people would have noticed. But to Michael, it was sacred. More than paper. It was memory. It was purpose. He'd carried it with him since college. Before the championships, before the shoe deals, before the world knew his name. It wasn't fancy, just a sheet ripped from a spiral notebook, the lines slightly smudged from ink that had long since bled. Written in his own sharp, determined handwriting were just a few simple words. A list, really, but not of plays or stats. This was a promise, a plan. At the top, in bold letters, "Things I'll do when I make it." Below that, a numbered list. No more than 15 items. Some were small. Buy Mom a house. Take Dad to Italy. Pay off the mortgage. Others were bigger, abstract almost. Never forget where I came from. Build something that lasts. Make them proud. He wrote it during a night of silence, sitting on the edge of his dorm room bed, the sounds of the campus quieting down outside his window. It had been a rough week. Training was relentless. His body was sore, and for a moment, he questioned whether he'd ever make it to the level people expected. He pulled out a notebook, not to draw up plays or plan workouts, but to remind himself why he was doing this. That list was born from hunger not just for success, but for redemption. For proof that the sacrifices meant something. That his mother's weary hands and sleepless nights would someday lead to comfort. That the long drives, the missed moments, the early morning practices would add up to more than just applause. They'd add up to peace. Over the years, that list traveled with him. From college dorms to NBA locker rooms, from quiet hotels to private jets. He never showed it to anyone. Not teammates, not agents, not even his closest friends. It wasn't for them. It was his compass, hidden in plain sight. He updated it occasionally, added a date when he accomplished something, crossed things out with a line that sometimes trembled from emotion. When he finally bought the house for his mother, he didn't just cross it off, he wrote next to it in all caps. She cried. A note, just for him. A reminder that it wasn't about the purchase, it was about the moment. Sometimes, on hard days, he would take it out and read it slowly, letting each line ground him. It didn't matter if he had just dropped 40 points or lost a game at the buzzer. The list never changed. It wasn't impressed by trophies. It didn't react to fame. It just sat quietly in his wallet, steady as ever, reminding him of the boy who once stared at the ceiling at night, wondering if dreams were really meant for kids like him. There was one line on the list he never crossed out. Be the man she believed I could be. He didn't know if he'd ever reach that one completely. Because to him, that was the mountain with no top. The kind of goal that wasn't about one action, but a lifetime of them. It pushed him more than any coach ever had. More than any critic ever could. And when he thought about the moments that really defined him, it wasn't the highlight reels or magazine covers. It was the quiet ones. Reading that list alone in a locker room after a tough loss. Glancing at it before walking into a meeting that could change his future. Running his thumb over the ink before making a decision he knew would affect the people he loved. It was a hidden blueprint. Not for fame, but for character. Not for wealth, but for purpose. Because behind the superstar, behind the branding and the accolades, was a man who once scribbled down his dreams on a scrap of paper. And instead of chasing someone else's version of greatness, he followed his own map. One that led not just to success, but to something far rarer. Meaning. He didn't want just any house. Not the kind that popped up in glossy brochures with perfectly staged furniture and echoing hallways. He wasn't looking for marble floors or crystal chandeliers, though he could afford all of that 10 times over. What he wanted, what he needed was something different. A space that felt lived in before anyone lived there. A place that didn't shout wealth, but whispered home. Michael had seen plenty of houses by that point. Mansions tucked behind gates, high-rises with sweeping views, estates with names carved into stone pillars. But none of them felt right. He'd walk through them with realtors trailing behind, talking square footage and property value, and he'd nod politely while mentally checking out. They were beautiful, sure, impressive, but they weren't hers. And that's what mattered. This house wasn't for show. It wasn't to impress the press or prove anything to anyone. It was for Dolores. For the woman who raised 5 kids on strength and faith, who stretched every dollar and every ounce of patience to make sure they felt safe, even when she wasn't. She never asked for much, just health, just honesty, just a chance to rest. And now, he could give her that. But it had to be perfect. So he searched, quietly, personally, between games, between flights, between the chaos. He'd slip away to tour properties alone, sometimes with a trusted friend, sometimes just with a gut feeling and a folded note in his pocket. And then one day, after another string of impersonal walkthroughs, something changed. The house wasn't in the city's flashiest zip code. It wasn't the biggest or the boldest. It sat on a quiet, tree-lined street, set back from the road, half hidden behind blooming dogwoods and tall hedges. The moment he stepped out of the car, something clicked. There was no grand gate, no dramatic entrance, just a worn path leading to a wide, welcoming porch. And that was the first sign. Inside, it was warm, not in temperature, but in feeling. The light streamed in just right through the bay windows. The floors creaked a little, but not from age, more like character. The kitchen had space, sunlight, and a window over the sink. He smiled at that. She always said she wanted to do dishes and watch the birds. There were rooms that could hold memories, holidays, grandchildren, quiet mornings with a cup of coffee. It didn't have a home theater or 10-car garage, but it had something else: soul. He stood in what would be the living room, ran his hand along the mantel, and pictured the family photos that would someday line it. Then he walked the backyard. There was a small garden, unkept but full of potential. He could see her out there already, knees in the dirt, hat on her head, humming some old tune she always did when she was content. He didn't need to see any more. When he told the agent he was ready to make an offer, the man blinked twice. "Are you sure? You've seen much bigger places." Michael didn't flinch. "This is the one." He didn't tell anyone at first, not until the papers were signed and the walls were his to paint with memories. He worked quietly behind the scenes, making small changes, personal touches. He had her favorite armchair shipped in, the one she used to sit in to read her Bible when he was a boy. He found the exact wallpaper she'd once said reminded her of home. He stocked the kitchen with her spices, her cookbooks, the pots she'd once used until the handles wore thin. When it was ready, he didn't make a big announcement. No film crew, no ribbon cutting, just a call. "Mom, I found a place I want you to see." She didn't ask questions, just trusted, like always. When they pulled up to the house and she stepped onto that porch, something in her stilled. She didn't ask how much it cost, or how long he'd been looking. She just looked around, eyes wide, a little glassy, and said quietly, "This feels like home." And that was the moment he knew. It wasn't about square footage. It wasn't about status. It was about finding a space that finally matched her heart. A place where peace didn't feel borrowed. A house built not from cement and wood, but from years of unseen sacrifices. And in that quiet street, under those blooming trees, Michael Jordan found not just a house, but the house. The one his mother deserved all along. He stared at the house one last time before getting back in the car. The sun had started to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the driveway. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you breathe slower, deeper, like even the air was asking you to pay attention. Michael sat in the driver's seat, engine off, keys in his lap. He didn't drive away right away. Instead, he just sat there, letting the moment sink in. The search was over. Weeks of walking through houses that looked right but didn't feel right, of smiling politely while his heart stayed quiet, gone. This one had spoken to something deep in him, something he didn't always have words for. And now that he'd found it, there was only one thing left to do. He reached for his phone. The number was already saved, of course. It always had been. He could have dialed it with his eyes closed, half asleep, in the middle of chaos. He paused, thumb hovering over the green button. Not because he wasn't sure, but because he was. This wasn't just any call. This was the call. The one he'd imagined making since he was a teenager, scribbling dreams into a notebook between classes. The one he'd thought about after every buzzer beater, every shoe deal, every sleepless hotel night. He took a breath, then pressed call. It rang twice before she picked up. "Hey, baby," she answered, voice soft, familiar, full of that same steadiness that had carried him through his lowest lows and highest highs. He smiled, already hearing the warmth in her tone. "Hey, Mom? You okay? You sound funny." He laughed under his breath. "No, I'm good. I'm really good." There was a pause. She knew him too well. "What's going on?" "I found it," he said. She was quiet for a second. "Found what?" He leaned back in the seat, looking at the house again through the windshield. "The house. Your house. The one I told you about." For a moment, there was no sound on the line. Just quiet. The kind that carried more weight than any words. Then came the sound of her breath catching. Not dramatic, just a shift. The kind of pause that only comes when someone feels something deep enough to stop everything. "You did?" she whispered. "Yeah," he said, his voice softer now. "It's perfect. Not too big, not too flashy, just right. You'll love the kitchen. And the porch? You're gonna want to sit out there every morning. It's got those big trees you like. There's even a little garden out back. Needs work, but I figured you'd want to get your hands in the dirt." She didn't say anything at first. He heard a sniff, then the sound of her trying to find her voice again. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." He smiled, eyes suddenly damp. "I already put the offer in. It's ours." Another pause. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly, like she always did when she felt overwhelmed. "You've already done so much." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to. I've always wanted to." He could hear the tears in her voice now, even though she was trying to keep it together. "You remember when you were little you used to say, 'One day I'm gonna buy you a house, Mama?' You used to whisper it when you thought I was asleep." He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I meant it." There was a rustle on her end, like she'd stood up, maybe walked to the window. "Michael, I don't even have words for this." "You don't have to," he said. "Just get ready to come see it." She laughed softly, a watery laugh full of disbelief and gratitude. "You're gonna make me cry." "I hope I do," he said, smiling again. "Because you deserve it. Every brick of it. Every inch." There was another long silence, not heavy, but full. Full of love, full of memories, full of the weight of years past and sacrifices made. And somewhere in that stillness, something shifted for both of them. A promise made in a small kitchen years ago had finally been fulfilled, not with fanfare, not with cameras, but with a phone call, and the simple words that meant everything. "I found it." The house stood quietly beneath the morning sun, dressed in its usual calm. Birds danced across the branches in the yard, and the wind gently nudged the chimes hanging from the porch rail. Nothing about the day looked out of the ordinary. And that was exactly the point. Dolores had no idea what was coming. Michael had planned every detail in secret. He didn't want cameras, press, or attention. This wasn't a photo op. It wasn't about headlines. It was about her. Just her. The woman who never asked for more than what she needed, who gave everything and expected nothing in return. If there was going to be a delivery, it had to feel like her life always had, quiet, meaningful, and layered with emotion most people would miss if they weren't paying attention. He'd arranged for her to be out for the morning. Nothing unusual, just a visit to a friend, a casual breakfast. Enough time for the team he trusted to pull everything together. While she laughed over coffee across town, a different kind of movement stirred at the house. Trucks rolled in quietly. No logos, no noise. Movers stepped with intention, carrying in boxes, furniture, pieces of her past, pieces of her future. Each item had been hand-picked. Nothing generic, nothing off a showroom floor. Michael had remembered the smallest things, the way she always said the living room needed a mirror over the mantel, the old rocking chair she missed from her childhood home, the collection of cookbooks she'd once sold at a garage sale just to buy basketball shoes. It was all coming back. Every piece of it. Even the scent of the house had been thought through. A diffuser tucked into the hallway slowly filled the air with lavender and warm vanilla, her favorites. The curtains in the guest room were the exact pattern she'd admired once in a catalog and never mentioned again. The family photos had been framed in soft wood, already placed throughout the house, not staged, but natural, like they'd been there for years. But the heart of the delivery wasn't in the furniture. It was in the moments built into every corner. A drawer in the kitchen already held her old recipe cards, slightly faded, corners worn from years of handling. The bathroom mirror had a small post-it tucked on the side with a familiar scribble, "Good morning, beautiful." He'd written it himself. And in the living room, resting gently on the arm of her favorite chair, sat a book she used to read to him when he was too young to remember the words. Worn spine, taped edges. He'd found it. Somehow, after all this time. By the time the last box was opened, the house didn't feel like a new place. It felt lived in, warm, real, like home. And as the last person stepped out, and the final touch was adjusted, a vase of fresh daisies by the front window, Michael stood on the porch looking in. He let the moment wash over him. All the hours, the thought, the weight of what this meant, it all folded into that stillness. He didn't have long. The car pulled up gently to the curb, and his heart picked up just a little. She stepped out, unsuspecting, holding her purse close, laughing about something someone had said. She walked slowly, her eyes still on the sidewalk, until she looked up. Her steps slowed. She tilted her head. The house didn't look all that different from the outside. That was intentional, but something in the way Michael stood there, hands in his pockets, a soft smile on his face, that was the giveaway. "What's going on?" she asked, halfway up the walk. "Just come inside," he said. She followed him up the steps, her fingers trailing along the railing. The moment the door opened, it hit her. The scent, the light, the chair in the corner. She stepped in fully, her purse still dangling loosely in her hand. Her eyes moved from wall to wall, room to room, slowly, carefully. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Tears began to gather quietly. Not from shock, not even from surprise, but from understanding. She turned to him, hand to her chest, voice barely a whisper. "You did all this?" He nodded. "I wanted you to come home." She reached for his hand and didn't let go. And in that quiet room, filled with memories both old and brand new, no one said much. They didn't need to. Because sometimes love doesn't come wrapped in ribbon or shouted through megaphones. Sometimes it arrives like a delivery at dawn, quiet, precise, and straight from the heart. She stood just inside the doorway, her fingers resting lightly against the frame, as if steadying herself for something she couldn't yet name. The house didn't rush to speak. It whispered. The scent of lavender and something sweet, maybe vanilla or almond, floated gently in the air, tugging at memories she hadn't visited in years. The floor beneath her feet didn't creak the way she thought it might. It welcomed her. Michael stepped aside, giving her space. This wasn't about him anymore. This moment, this walk belonged to her. She took a single step forward. The living room was first. It wasn't grand. It didn't scream wealth or extravagance. Instead, it felt familiar. The way the couch curved near the window, the texture of the throw blanket draped over the back, the way sunlight landed on the coffee table, it all felt like something she had dreamed but never said out loud. She reached out, touching the soft cushion with her fingertips, then glanced toward the fireplace. There it was, the mirror. Simple, round, framed in soft brass, just like the one she'd once admired in a shop window and talked herself out of buying. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone, not even Michael. Yet here it was, catching the morning light the way she had imagined all those years ago. She didn't speak. Her eyes moved slowly, carefully, as though she was afraid to miss a single detail. Every corner of the room held something that felt like her. The soft rug underfoot, the old piano in the corner she hadn't played since her 20s, the tiny framed photo of her mother smiling in a garden. She turned to him, barely above a whisper. "How did you know?" He shrugged, quiet. "I just remembered." The hallway opened up next, stretching out like a path lined with old stories. On one wall hung pictures, not just the glossy kind from press events or games, but the ones from before. Michael, toothless and proud on his first day of school. A family barbecue with plastic plates and lopsided smiles. Her and his father, dancing barefoot in the backyard, captured mid-laugh by someone with shaky hands. She stopped in front of one photo, gently adjusting the frame. Her voice caught. "That was your 8th birthday. You cried because the cake didn't have enough chocolate chips." Michael laughed softly behind her. "And you fixed it with chocolate syrup. Poured the whole bottle on top. I just wanted you to smile." "You always did." She kept walking. The kitchen was next. When she crossed the threshold, something in her stilled. She looked around slowly. The counters were the soft, muted color she'd always loved. The backsplash was patterned with blue and cream tiles, almost identical to the ones in her childhood home. And on the countertop sat her old cast-iron skillet, black, worn, seasoned with years of Sunday mornings. She opened a drawer, expecting nothing. But inside were her recipe cards, tucked neatly, some faded, some smudged with flour and oil from decades ago. "I thought I lost these," she said, fingertips brushing the edge of the stack. "You didn't," Michael said. "They were just waiting for a kitchen that deserved them." She pressed her lips together, trying to hold the emotion in. It wasn't just the things, it was the care, the memory, the knowing. They moved down the hall again, this time toward the bedrooms. One door opened to a guest room already dressed with fresh linens and a small vase of flowers. Another revealed a reading nook by the window, a soft chair, and a stack of books she loved but hadn't seen in years. Then came the master bedroom. When she stepped inside, her breath caught again. The walls were soft earth tones, calming. The bed was dressed in her favorite shade of blue, and the curtains danced gently with the breeze. But what drew her in wasn't the decor. It was the window. It looked out over a small patch of garden, the kind she'd always said she'd tend to one day when life slowed down. And there it was, freshly planted, waiting for her. She walked toward the glass and stood there for a moment, one hand resting on the windowsill. He didn't speak. He just stood behind her, giving her space. When she finally turned, her eyes were full, not of surprise, but of something deeper. Gratitude, memory, love. "This isn't just a house," she said quietly. "This is my life. Everything I gave, everything I forgot I needed, it's all here." Michael nodded, voice low. I wanted you to feel what I felt every time you looked at me with pride. Safe. Seen. Home. She didn't rush to hug him. Instead, she stood there in the stillness, letting the weight of everything sink in. Because sometimes the greatest gifts aren't loud. They don't shine or shout. Sometimes they walk with you through familiar halls, let you touch the walls of your past, and remind you of who you've always been. And in that house, her house, every step forward felt like a step back into herself. She didn't cry right away. Even as her eyes scanned every lovingly placed photograph, every book carefully shelved in the reading nook, every pot and pan nestled into drawers like old friends, Dolores held herself with grace. There had always been strength in her quiet, a calm that grounded Michael through chaos, through fame, through loss. But the kind of tears that were coming now weren't ones you could hold back forever. They weren't loud or messy. They were the kind that built up slowly over years. The kind that waited, patient and heavy, for the right floor to fall on. And that floor was hardwood. In the middle of the kitchen where morning sun poured in and danced across the counter, she paused. One hand on the cool surface, the other holding a recipe card, too smudged to read clearly. Her shoulders rose just a little, then fell. And that's when it started. The first tear didn't fall like a movie tear. It didn't streak down her cheek for effect. It just slipped, quiet, unnoticed even by her, until it hit the polished wood below. A soft sound, almost invisible. But Michael heard it, felt it. He stood in the doorway watching her from a distance he couldn't measure. This was her moment, her release, not something he could interrupt or rush. She looked down at the floor, maybe surprised by what she saw, a single drop, then two. She bent slowly, reaching out as if to wipe them up. But she didn't. She just stared. And the weight of it all caught up to her. Because this wasn't just a home. This was everything she had held in. All the birthdays spent alone. All the holidays when Michael was on the road. All the dinners she cooked for one, pretending the silence was peace and not loneliness. Every late-night prayer whispered into the dark for his safety, his happiness, his heart. It had all landed here, in this space, on this floor. He walked toward her, quiet steps against the grain. She didn't turn right away. She kept her eyes on the floor, on those little circles of salt water that now reflected the light like tiny stars. "When you were little," she said, voice trembling, "you once spilled juice right here. Or, it felt like here. You were 6. I'd just cleaned the floor, and I was tired. But you were laughing so hard, holding that plastic cup with both hands, trying not to let it go." He nodded slowly. "I remember." "I yelled," she whispered. "Not loud, but I was sharp. I remember the look on your face, like your joy had broken something." Michael stepped closer. "You didn't break anything," she said, finally turning to face him. "But I did. I let the weight of everything press down so hard, I forgot to let you be a kid." Her tears came faster now. She didn't try to stop them. She let them fall, let them hit the floor in the same spot where laughter had once slipped and scattered. "I thought if I held everything in, if I stayed strong, stayed quiet, it would make it easier for you to fly. But all this time, you were watching, remembering." "I saw everything," Michael said. "Even the things you thought I missed." She looked around the kitchen again, breathing it in. "This house, this floor, it feels like I've been given back parts of myself I didn't know I lost." He reached for her hand. "I wanted you to have a place," he said, "where every tear you ever held back could finally fall, and where they wouldn't be signs of weakness, but proof that you made it. That we made it." She looked down again. The hardwood beneath them wasn't just a surface, it was a witness. To scraped knees, to quiet mornings, to lessons whispered in tired voices. And now, to the most sacred kind of gratitude. Not the kind you post, not the kind you frame, the kind you feel in your bones. She squeezed his hand and leaned into his shoulder, and together they stood there in silence. Just two people, shaped by love and loss, by sacrifice and triumph, by all the things that never got said but were always understood. And the tears kept coming not out of pain, but from the kind of love that had waited its whole life for a moment like this. The kind that doesn't ask for anything in return, except maybe the strength to let go, and the floor to catch you when you finally do. The house had settled into silence by the time she found herself standing in the backyard, arms folded loosely, her gaze sweeping over the garden beds, the fence line, the old oak tree that someone must have planted decades ago. Evening had begun to drape itself over the property, casting long shadows across the lawn, and the air smelled of earth, of new beginnings, of something almost sacred. Michael watched her from the porch, unsure whether to follow or give her space. She wasn't crying anymore, but there was something about the way she stood completely still, as if the world had slowed just for her, that made him hesitate. She turned after a moment, her eyes meeting his. Not with surprise, not even with gratitude anymore, something deeper, something quieter. "You remembered everything," she said, her voice gentle but firm, like it always had been when he was a boy and she needed him to listen. He stepped down the wooden stairs toward her. "I tried." She smiled, the lines at the corners of her mouth softening. "You did more than try." They stood there together in the growing twilight, the quiet between them speaking volumes. Then she turned her face away, looking out toward the horizon. "There's just one thing," she said after a pause. "One thing I want to ask for, and it's not in the house." Michael blinked, surprised, not because she was asking, but because she had waited this long. "Anything," he said without hesitation. She took her time. Dolores Jordan had never been a woman who rushed words. She chose them like she chose fabric, like she chose lessons, carefully, with thought, with purpose. "When your father died," she began, "I packed away all his things, not because I wanted to forget, but because I didn't know how to carry him with me. Every shirt, every book, every pair of old scuffed shoes. I boxed them up. I even packed the chair he used to fall asleep in watching the evening news." Michael nodded, the memory thick in his throat. He could still picture his father in that chair, slippers on, head tilted back, glasses sliding down his nose. "I never knew what to do with all of it," she continued, "and part of me thought, maybe I wasn't supposed to. Maybe letting go was the right thing. But this house, it's brought everything back. Not the pain, the love, the time, the truth of us." She turned back to him now, eyes glistening again, but not breaking. "I'd like a room for him." Michael felt something shift inside his chest. Not the grand request he had expected, not a trip around the world or a diamond bracelet, not anything with a price tag. A room. Just a room. "He'd like that," Michael whispered. She nodded slowly. "Nothing fancy. Just his chair, his books, maybe a record player with his old jazz collection. I want to sit in that space sometimes and remember. Not just him, but who we were with him." Michael's throat tightened. He had flown to space in sneakers, scored game winners with seconds left, built empires with his name etched into the corners of cities. But in this moment, he felt like a boy again, staring up at his mother, the way he always had when the world got too big. "I'll build it," he said, his voice steady now. "Exactly how you remember it." She reached out, placing her hand gently over his. "No," she said with a quiet laugh. "Not how I remember it. How we remember it." We'll do it together." And there it was, that invisible thread again, the same one that had always connected them. From the kitchen table promises to the whispered prayers in darkened bedrooms, from high school bleachers to championship parades. A bond not built by fame or fortune, but by years of sacrifice, of quiet strength, of unwavering love. As the stars began to prick the sky above, she looked back at the house, her house where every hallway held a memory, every room a piece of her heart restored. And in the yard, with the grass soft beneath their feet and the night folding in gently around them, she asked for the only thing she'd ever truly wanted, a place where love didn't have to be spoken to be understood, a space not to move forward from but to return to. And Michael, her son, the boy who had once promised the world over a bowl of cereal, simply held her hand and said, "We'll make it perfect." The letter wasn't long. Folded neatly in a cream-colored envelope with slightly frayed edges, it sat on the corner of the kitchen counter, right next to a bowl of lemons and a small glass vase holding a single white lily. It hadn't arrived by post, hadn't been dropped off by a courier. Michael had placed it there himself that morning before the sun rose. No fanfare, no camera crews, just ink on paper and the words he'd waited a lifetime to say. She found it just after breakfast. The house still smelled like toast and brewed coffee. She'd moved with her usual quiet grace, the kind that made you wonder if she was walking or gliding. Her eyes landed on it immediately. It was the only thing in the room that didn't belong there, and yet somehow belonged the most. She knew his handwriting before she even touched it. Still the same since high school. Sharp, careful, slightly slanted to the right. She opened it slowly, as if tearing the seal too fast might undo something sacred. He didn't say much, but what he said undid her. "Mom, I couldn't give you back the years. I couldn't redo the birthdays, the missed phone calls, the heavy silences. But I remembered it all. Every meal you skipped to feed us. Every shirt you wore threadbare so we could have new ones. Every 'I'm fine' when I knew you weren't. I used to think success was the game-winning shot, the crowd chanting my name, the trophies, the shoes. But none of that meant anything until I saw you smile in a house that had your name on the deed. You were always the real MVP, and you never asked for recognition. But I want you to know I saw you. I remember everything, and I never forgot where I came from. Love always, Michael." She didn't cry right away. She just held the letter against her chest, breathing in the scent of it, as if it somehow carried the memory of his childhood laughter. That little boy with scraped knees and sky-sized dreams. The one who used to fall asleep to the hum of her humming in the next room. The words circled in her mind like wind chimes in a breeze, gentle, persistent, impossible to ignore. You never forgot where you came from. It was more than a compliment, more than a thank you. It was proof that despite the arenas, the fame, the net worth that climbed higher than most people could imagine, he had stayed grounded. He had stayed hers. Later that day, the neighbors came by. Some had grown up with Michael. Others were younger, just kids who'd only known his name through highlight reels and vintage posters. They brought pies, cards, fresh-picked flowers, and smiles that stretched wider than the driveways. But more than that, they brought stories. "I remember when he used to shoot hoops at the rec center after school," one old friend said, laughing softly. "Wouldn't leave until they turned off the lights. He gave me his last dollar once," another added. "Didn't even blink. Said I needed it more than he did." Even the mailman stopped by. "He used to ask about my wife," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Most folks don't ask. He always remembered her name." She listened to them all, heart swelling with a different kind of pride, not the kind that came from trophies or endorsements, but the kind that grew from seeing your child carry the values you planted, all the way into their legacy. Later, when the house was quiet again, she stood by the window, watching the wind ripple through the trees. The letter was tucked in her pocket now, creased, warm, already reread more times than she could count. He hadn't just given her a house. He had returned something that many never get back. A sense of being seen, truly seen. For the love she gave without asking, for the battles she fought in silence, for the unshakable foundation she built with 2 hands and a heart that refused to quit. And now, with the world behind them, with everything they'd gained and everything they'd lost, she smiled to herself and whispered the only thing left to say. "You never forgot." And that was enough. She sat alone in the sunroom as the light faded, her fingers gently tracing the rim of a mug gone cold hours ago. Outside, the garden glowed gold, touched by the last breath of day. Inside, memories danced between the walls, some old, some freshly born. The laughter that echoed through the hallways wasn't loud, but it lingered. Warm, familiar. Michael stood in the doorway, arms crossed, gaze resting on her. He didn't need to say anything. He had learned over time that the most powerful moments rarely required words. Some truths existed only in silence. This was not just a house, not just a gift. It was a testament to a woman who never gave up, who never asked for the world but gave hers away, piece by piece, so her children could build their own. A woman who'd never sought applause but deserved a standing ovation. He had given her more than walls and windows. He'd returned years that time, had tried to steal. He'd honored every unspoken prayer, every long shift, every quiet sacrifice made in the shadows. In her eyes, he hadn't just become a legend, he had become her promise fulfilled. And for Michael, this moment wasn't about the money or the media. It wasn't about the size of the house or the sparkle of the keys. It was about a little boy who once watched his mother stretch every dollar, wipe every tear, and whisper through exhaustion, "Keep going." Now, he could finally look her in the eye and say, "I heard you." Because legacy isn't carved in stone or stitched into jerseys. It lives in gratitude, in honoring where you come from, in making sure the person who carried you never feels forgotten. So, as the stars blinked to life above their home and the world kept spinning, one thing stood still, etched forever in the heart of a mother and her son. He remembered. And in the end, that was everything. That was